Alright guys, so tonight your homework was to reread one of the poems in your poem packet, in your E.E. Cummings packet, and you were going to look at it in a more in-depth way. So the way that I want you to look at it tonight is for theme. And what I'm going to go through in this presentation is theme in poetry and understanding how to find the theme of a specific poem. You know, many students and just readers and writers in general have a really hard time understanding the meaning of poems and poetry, and that's where a lot of frustration comes in. So knowing how to read a poem and where to look for themes and meaning can really make reading and writing about poetry a lot less intimidating and make it a lot easier to look for specific devices, whether it be literary or sound devices, which we will get into later. So as a recap, what is theme? We learned about theme in relation to novels, but in poetry, it's not that much different. So the theme of a work is not its subject, but rather its central idea, which may be stated directly or indirectly. So it's not the subject of the poem, but it's what the poem is about, okay? Why is understanding theme important? Well, understanding theme is the first step in really understanding a poem. You know, you need to understand your feelings, but you can't necessarily understand your feelings if you don't know what's going on. So the two kind of go hand in hand. There are really 5 steps to understanding theme. The first, examine the title. Second, read slowly and aloud. Third, identify the speaker. 4, determine the subjects. 5, determine the types of imagery and metaphor that are used within the poem. Now I'm going to go through each one of these, so just make note that these are the 5 steps. Now the first step is to really look at the title. You know, the title is a part of the poem. I know that you guys have a tendency to just skip right over and start in with the words, but the title can be a pivotal part of the poem and a huge pointer towards the meaning. It asks you or pushes you in a certain direction by making you ask certain questions. So, you know, what does the title make you think that the poem is about? What kind of keywords does it have that are signals to theme? Like I said, make sure that you remember that the title is a huge part of the poem, and you should annotate it. So let's practice here. Alright, I'm looking at the title from the poem we worked on in class today. So anyone lived in a pretty how town. Now, if I were to go more close to this and look more closely at the title, I'm going to know that anyone lived in a pretty how town. Now I also noticed that that is the first line of the poem. And that's what those brackets mean as well, that there is no title to the poem. But the first line is also a huge pointer. So anyone lived in a pretty how town. I could say it's about a town and how someone lived in that town. Alright, so I already have a huge guess as to what the poem is about. So now what I want you guys to do is I want you to practice here. You know, look at the title of the poem we're reading tonight. Love is more thicker than forget. Think about what meaning and what subject and theme this poem might have without even looking at any of the words. Think about that. Now you want to ask yourself, what is the title asking you to think about? And what are the key words in this title? So some of the key words are, you know, love, thicker, forget. Those are some really descriptive things, you know, thicker than forget. So, as I said, titles are a good way to point you in the direction of the meaning of the poem. The second step to understanding theme is to read slowly and aloud. Now, poetry is not about one main point, alright? So, meaning, you know, is often contained in word choice, sounds, and rhythm. There's a lot of stuff that's going on in a poem. So rushing through this poem just to get to the meaning is one of the worst possible ways to read poetry. The meaning can be anywhere in anything, and you have to read your poem aloud several times, slowly and in a focused manner, to really understand what's going on. And while you're doing this, you need to make note of your own experience. So remember when we talked about the 3 major questions, what feelings does this poem evoke? What memories, associations, or sensations are being brought up? What ideas are being expressed? And what view of the world is the poet trying to suggest to you? These are all made up pieces of your experience, and they come into play when you are interpreting a poem. You also need to make sure that you take note of your reactions as you read through a poem, because that is a very big key as to what's going on. So let's look again at the poem you're looking at tonight for homework. Love is more thicker than forget. Reading this slowly and aloud is going to help you a lot, alright? You want to ask yourself, is the poem harsh or is it soft? What is the language like? Is it elegant? Is it rough? Is it short? Is it elaborate? Are the words or sounds that dominate the poem? Are there things that are repeated a lot? These are all pointers towards theme. The third step is identifying the speaker. Now, one important key to understanding a poem is to find out who is speaking. Is the narrator using I, you, or the third person? Does the speaker seem to be an individual person or a collective, such as a town, a state, a country, or a gender? If you can't identify the narrator specifically, at least try to notice whether the speaker seems to be directly addressing the audience versus just telling a story about somebody else. The fourth step is determining the subjects of the poem. Again, poems are usually about more than one thing, so it is not just the subject, but the subjects. You need to read through the poem and notice your first reaction. What seems to be the primary subject matter of the poem? What types of scenes does it depict? What actions, events, or emotions are discussed? Make note of every individual scene or description. Let's practice that again with the poem in front of you. Is there a very clear subject? What seems to be the primary subject matter of the poem? Now, it's pretty clear that love is a large subject here. It's in the title. It shows up in every stanza. So that's something that you need to make note of in your annotations. Now, the fifth step and the final step is determining the type of imagery and metaphor that is used. So poems often contain imagery which, as we know, refers to concrete descriptions. Metaphor and simile, which refer to comparisons, are also common and are often used in conjunction with imagery. Both of these elements help you to understand meaning of the poem. So, for example, when a poem that includes imagery of dying or decaying fruit versus a poem full of imagery of ripe, healthy fruit, it might indicate a theme of death and dying rather than a theme of life and happiness. In addition, in terms of metaphor and simile, a relationship compared to a freshly picked apple is very different from a relationship that's compared to a cut of bloody meat. You don't want someone comparing you and your girlfriend to a slab of meat that a butcher's about to chop. That's aggressive. So you want to pay careful attention to what the author chooses to compare and the imagery that is used throughout the poem. Now remember that poems don't always have only one identifiable meaning or theme. There are often multiple, if not many. Poems are often about sharing an experience, a feeling, or an idea. That's why it's important for you to just relax and enjoy the poem as you read it, to think about your feelings, to think about the ideas and your emotions and how you connect with it. So tonight for homework, your task is to reread the poem Love is More Thicker Than Forget in the E.E. Cummings packet, and I want you to focus on theme. Annotate the poem. Think about the 5 steps. Try to come into class ready to discuss what you believe one of the major themes is.